Okay, so let's unpack this whole TikTok thing. We're diving deep today into the potential ban in the U.S. We've got a news clip and an article that are going to help us break down like all the details of this story. And it's happening so fast. This isn't like some distant threat. We're talking about a potential ban like as early as January 19th, 2025.
Yeah, what's really striking is just the sheer speed. I mean, this legal battle is unfolding so quickly. We've got this law that requires TikTok to be sold to a U.S. company or else face a complete ban, and this law was just upheld by a federal appeals court. So you know this isn't theoretical anymore. The clock is ticking.
Oh, absolutely. And as if this whole situation wasn't dramatic enough, we've got this like major twist that involves a very familiar figure, Donald Trump. I mean, he was one of the first to raise concerns about TikTok, right? He even tried to ban it when he was president, but now he might be the one to actually save it.
It's really quite the turn of events. You know, Trump has publicly stated that he opposes a ban now, and that he would actually work to save TikTok if he takes office again. And he's got a couple options, to potentially achieve this. He could try to use his influence over Congress, since Republicans control it, to just repeal the law entirely. Or he could just instruct the incoming attorney general to just not enforce it.
Okay, so we've got this legal battle that's playing out. We've got this rapidly approaching deadline. And we've got a former president who could potentially swoop in at the last minute to save the day. It's like a political thriller or something. But before we go too deep into like all the what ifs surrounding Trump, I want to understand like the core issue here. Like, why is the government so concerned about TikTok in the first place?
Right. So the government's arguments really center around two main points: national security and freedom of speech. So they're claiming that TikTok poses this national security threat because of all the massive amounts of user data that it collects. Data that they argue the Chinese government could access and potentially exploit.
Yeah, and the news clip that we have actually goes so far as to say there's like no question that the Chinese government will have access to this data because of how Chinese companies operate. I mean, it paints a pretty alarming picture.
It does, but I think we need to consider this in a broader context too, like the U.S. government collects data on its citizens as well. So, this raises some critical questions about their motivations for specifically targeting TikTok. Is it purely about data security, or are there other factors at play, perhaps related to like the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's more to this story than meets the eye. Are they saying that TikTok is being actively used for espionage by the Chinese government?
Well, that's where things get a little bit murky. The government hasn't actually publicly presented any concrete evidence to support that claim. In fact, a lot of their information in this case has been redacted, like hidden from public view and even from TikTok itself.
Wait, so they're basically accusing TikTok and building this whole legal case against them
Yeah.
based on secret evidence that TikTok can't even see? I mean, that doesn't seem fair at all.
Yeah, it's definitely a point of contention. TikTok's lawyers have argued that this whole case hinges on like hypothetical risks rather than actual proof of wrongdoing. So they're being forced to defend themselves against accusations that they don't even know the specifics of.
So it's kind of a guilty until proven innocent situation. That's a concerning precedent to set,
Yeah.
especially for a platform with hundreds of millions of users here in the U.S.
Precisely, but the Department of Justice argues that, their concerns are valid. They're pointing to like unspecified actions that TikTok allegedly took in the past due to pressure from the Chinese government as justification for their current concerns. But without seeing like the unredacted evidence, it's really difficult to assess the validity of their claims.
So we've got this high-stakes game of chess that's unfolding, with each side making these calculated moves and counter moves. It's all very intriguing. But I think it's important to like bring this back to the average TikTok user. Like if I'm just scrolling through and watching funny videos, should I be worried about all of this?
That's a great question. And it really highlights the human element of this whole situation. For the vast majority of users, TikTok is simply a source of entertainment and a way to like connect with other people. It's important to keep that in mind amidst all the legal and geopolitical drama.
But what about the data that they're collecting? Should we be concerned that our personal information could potentially end up in the hands of the Chinese government?
Well, it's certainly a valid concern, but we need to acknowledge that we live in an age of pervasive data collection. It's not just TikTok. Every time you use your phone, browse the internet, interact with an app, you're leaving a digital footprint. And this isn't to diminish the potential risks associated with TikTok's data collection, but to highlight the broader issue of data privacy in the digital age.
So you're saying it's less about TikTok specifically and more about the larger systems of data collection that we all participate in.
Exactly. We need to be aware of how our data is being collected, used, and potentially shared, regardless of the specific app or platform.
That's a crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in like the specifics of the TikTok case and lose sight of the larger implications for data privacy and digital security. But before we dive too deep into that, let's get back to the immediate situation with TikTok. So what are the potential outcomes here?
Well, there are three main possibilities. First, TikTok could be banned in the US, as the law currently dictates. Second, ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, could sell its US operations to an American company, which would satisfy the law's requirements.
And then there's that third possibility, the wild card. Donald Trump potentially intervening to save TikTok.
Correct. And each of these scenarios has its own set of complex implications, both for TikTok and for the larger tech landscape.
This is where it gets really interesting. I mean, we've got these three potential outcomes, each with the potential to like reshape the future of social media, international relations, and even how we think about data privacy.
Yeah, it's a complex web of interconnected issues, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Okay, so we've laid out the groundwork here. We've got the legal battle, the looming deadline, the potential for a Trump intervention, and the broader concerns about data privacy and national security. But there's another layer to this story that we haven't even touched on yet.
Yes, the algorithm. This is where things get truly fascinating.
So the algorithm, that's at the heart of so many conversations about social media these days. How does this play into the concerns about TikTok?
Well, the U.S. government has expressed concern about the potential for the Chinese government to kind of exert control over TikTok's algorithm. So you can imagine a scenario where through subtle tweaks to the algorithm, certain content gets promoted, while other viewpoints are suppressed.
Yeah, the news clip we have actually described it as like a potential propaganda tool, able to subtly influence like the opinions and beliefs of millions of American users. It's a pretty chilling thought.
It is, and it raises some really important questions about the influence of algorithms in general. I mean, this isn't something that's unique to TikTok. The algorithms that shape our online experiences are at play on all social media platforms, from Facebook and Instagram to YouTube and Twitter. They determine what we see, what we read, and ultimately what information we're exposed to.
So while the focus is on TikTok right now, this issue has much broader implications for how we consume information online and how our perceptions are shaped by the technology we use every day.
Precisely. This situation forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the power that these tech companies wield. We need to be having conversations about transparency, accountability, and the ethical implications of algorithmic manipulation, not just in the context of TikTok, but across the entire digital landscape.
That's such a crucial point. But let's bring it back to the specifics of TikTok for a second. Is there any evidence that the Chinese government is actually manipulating the algorithm for like nefarious purposes?
Well, that's where things get tricky. As we discussed earlier, the U.S. government hasn't publicly presented any concrete evidence to support these claims. And a significant portion of their information in this case has been redacted. So it's hard to assess the validity of their concerns without having access to all the facts.
So we're left with a lot of speculation and unanswered questions. What does TikTok have to say about all of this?
Well, TikTok has vehemently denied these allegations. They're arguing that they operate independently of the Chinese government and that they prioritize user privacy and security. They've also pointed out that their algorithm is designed to personalize content based on user preferences, just like many other social media platforms.
Sounds like they're caught in a really difficult position. They're being accused of something they deny, but they're unable to fully defend themselves because the evidence against them is secret.
That's the crux of the issue. It raises some serious concerns about due process and transparency. It also highlights the challenges of regulating technology in a globalized world, where companies operate across borders and face these competing legal and political pressures.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers. But I think it's important to step back for a second and look at the bigger picture. This isn't just about TikTok. This is about this growing tension between the U.S. and China. These two global superpowers who are vying for technological and economic dominance.
You're absolutely right. This case is a microcosm of this larger geopolitical rivalry that's playing out between these two nations, and the outcome of this TikTok saga could have ripple effects that extend far beyond social media. It could impact trade relations, diplomatic ties, and the future of technological innovation.
The news clip we have even suggested that China could retaliate against American companies like Apple if TikTok is banned. Could this escalate into a full-blown trade war?
It's certainly a possibility. We've seen in the past how trade disputes between the US and China can quickly escalate, leading to tariff sanctions and economic uncertainty for both countries. The stakes are high, and the potential consequences are significant.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're living in an interconnected world where actions taken in one country can have these far-reaching implications for the global economy and the political landscape. This whole situation feels incredibly delicate, like one wrong move could set off a chain reaction with unpredictable consequences.
It does have that feeling of a geopolitical powder keg, and it's precisely why this case is so fascinating to analyze. It touches upon so many crucial issues of our time: technology, data privacy, national security, freedom of speech, and the balance of power between governments and tech giants.
It's a lot to unpack, and I think it's important for us to connect this back to the listener. So what does all of this mean for the average person who might be feeling overwhelmed by this complex web of information?
I think the key takeaway here is that this is not just a story about a social media app. It's a story about the choices we make, both individually and collectively. In a world that's increasingly dominated by technology, it's about the data we share, the content we consume, and the platforms we engage with.
So even if someone doesn't use TikTok themselves, this situation still has relevance to their lives.
Absolutely. The decisions made in this case could set precedents that affect how all tech companies operate, how our data is protected, and how information flows freely in the digital age.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a stake in the outcome of this story, whether we realize it or not. So let's bring it back to the three potential outcomes that we discussed earlier: a ban, a sale to a U.S. company, or a last-minute save by Trump.
Right, and each of these scenarios presents its own set of questions and challenges. And it's important to consider the potential consequences of each outcome, not just for TikTok, but for the broader technological and political landscape.
So let's start with the most drastic outcome: a complete ban on TikTok in the U.S. What would that actually look like?
Well, if TikTok is banned, it would be a significant event, not just for the company itself, but for the millions of American users and businesses that rely on the platform. It would also raise some serious questions about the future of other foreign-owned apps that operate in the U.S.
Yeah, would this set a precedent for banning any app
Yeah.
that the government deems a security risk, even if there's no actual proof of wrongdoing? I mean, it's a slippery slope.
It's definitely a concern. I mean, a ban like that could create this chilling effect on innovation and international collaboration in the tech sector. You know, companies might be hesitant to invest in the U.S. market if they're afraid that their apps could just be arbitrarily banned.
And on like a more personal level, a ban would cut off millions of Americans from a platform that they use for creative expression and communication. Some people even build businesses on TikTok.
Exactly. The impact would be felt way beyond Silicon Valley, would disrupt communities and livelihoods and the very fabric of online culture.
Okay, so a ban would be a major shakeup, to say the least. What about that second scenario then? A sale to a U.S. company. Would that actually address those core concerns that we talked about?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On the surface, it seems like a pretty straightforward solution. TikTok gets to stay in the U.S. market, and the data security concerns are at least theoretically alleviated by having an American company in control.
But would it really be that simple? I mean, who would even buy it? And even if a U.S. company takes over, wouldn't there still be those concerns about data sharing and potential influence from the Chinese government?
You've hit on some key points there. First, finding a suitable buyer wouldn't be easy. It would have to be a company with the resources and the infrastructure to manage a platform as massive and complex as TikTok. And then there's that issue of whether a sale would truly address the data security concerns.
It's not like the data just magically disappears because there's a new owner, right?
Exactly. The data would still exist, and there would still be questions about how it's managed, how it's protected, and how it's potentially shared, even with a U.S. company at the helm. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
And then, of course, we have that third scenario, the one that throws all the predictions out the window. Trump comes in and saves TikTok. What are the implications of that?
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. From a political standpoint, if Trump actually intervenes, either by pushing for a repeal of the law or by instructing the Attorney General to not enforce it, it would be a really significant assertion of executive power.
Yeah, it would raise all sorts of questions about the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress. And what message would it send to China? I mean, would it be seen as a sign of weakness? or willingness to negotiate?
It's hard to say how China would react. It could be interpreted as a concession, like a sign that the U.S. is backing down from its tough stance on TikTok. Or it could be seen as more of a strategic move, a way to de-escalate the tensions and avoid a potential trade war.
It's a fascinating geopolitical puzzle. And regardless of how it plays out, this whole situation has brought some really fundamental issues to light.
It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the role of technology in our lives, the power dynamics between governments and these tech giants, and the challenges of navigating a world where data is the new currency.
It's also raised some profound questions about the future of free speech in the digital age. If a popular platform like TikTok can be banned, just based on security concerns, what does that mean for other apps and services? Where do we draw the line between national security and censorship?
These are questions that we as a society really need to grapple with. The TikTok case is just one example of the complex challenges we face as technology continues to evolve and reshape our world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. If TikTok actually survives this, whether it's through a sale or last-minute reprieve from Trump, what does that mean for the future of data privacy, content control, and U.S.-China relations?
That's a question with no easy answers, but it's one that we all need to be asking ourselves. The choices we make today will shape the digital landscape of tomorrow, and the TikTok saga is a stark reminder that the stakes are incredibly high.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This story is far from over. The legal battle, the political maneuvering, the technological innovations, the shifting geopolitical landscape, it's all going to continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. And we'll be here to break it all down for you every step of the way.